Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live. I am Joanne Soike with For Better, For Worse Dog Training.
I'm Lisa Bataska with Canine Defined.
And tonight our guest is Keri Burchfield with Humane's Lifetime Bonds. So welcome, Keri.
Hi. Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. So why don't you go ahead and introduce what your program is and kind of what you do?
Okay. So I am professionally, I'm a professor of sociology, but I also run an animal-assisted activity intervention program called Lifetime Bonds. It is part of Safe Humane Chicago, which I think probably some of your audience has heard about. We have a range of programming, and Lifetime Bonds has become kind of our flagship. And I have been volunteering with Safe Humane for like 12 years and was fortunate enough that Cynthia Bathurst, the executive director, trusted me enough to pick up a Lifetime Bonds program and plant it in St. Charles when I was living there at the time in Geneva. And we started a Lifetime Bonds program at the Illinois Youth Center in St. Charles. So we work with the young men who are incarcerated there. It's modeled after the program we started in Chicago in 2010 with the Illinois Youth Center in Chicago. And we bring in both our own trained ambassador dogs as well as shelter dogs from a variety of shelters around Chicago. And the young men work with these dogs for 10 weeks, a couple hours every Sunday. And we talk all about things like getting to know a dog, appropriate introductions, positive reinforcement training, what that looks like, what that means, clicker training. And then we also get into some more themes that are relevant to animal welfare in Chicago and really around the country and around the world, things like breed stereotypes and the importance of spay and neuter, adopting when possible, knowing what a responsible breeder is, the problems of animal abuse and dog fighting. And so it's kind of an educational as well as a hands-on animal-assisted program that we do. And we are starting a new program actually tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. With Tails Humane Society and DeKalb High School.
Nice. And it's going to be similar to what you're doing with this.
Right. It will be similar. Some important differences that we won't be dealing with an incarcerated population. This will be DeKalb High School students that are part of their Target program, which is a kind of self-contained program within the larger high school. The students attend classes and do everything within this Target program. These are students who may have some emotional or behavioral challenges that makes the bigger school a little overwhelming to them. And so we will be working with them. A similar thing, 10 weeks, they will come to Tails Humane Society and we will have a similar educational piece and just get them, comfortable with working with dogs and kind of just exploring more of the magic that happens when you have young people who maybe have some challenges and dogs who maybe have some challenges, and they kind of see a bit of themselves in each other.
Nice. That's really neat.
Yeah.
So you said incarcerated individuals, and I'm sorry, I think you said it was Joliet.
So we started at Illinois Youth Center in Chicago. We are currently, we have a program in Chicago as well at IYC Chicago and IYC St. Charles. Yeah. So,
okay.
Yeah, and that's so we have the 3 programs going on now. We occasionally do some summer programming in and around the city. So Lifetime Bonds is really kind of this catch-all for a variety of programs that typically target, vulnerable youth, vulnerable in some way, maybe incarcerated, maybe with some behavioral challenges, and then shelter dogs. So we partner with Chicago Animal Care and Control, Naperville area Humane Society, Tails in DeKalb, and Animal Care League in Oak Park. So we try to give all of those shelters give some of their dogs a little time, to participate in the programming.
Nice.
So just a question on that, your educational program, right? A lot of times when you think about at risk, a lot of times they do come from areas where dogs sometimes are not treated well or treated the way that, a lot of us were dog sporters and dogs are, members of our family. How do you feel like your educational reach works out, like for them, for their families, for their friends?
Yeah. So it is, it's challenging because I recognize as a sociologist, and actually my training is in criminology. So I'm familiar with work in those neighborhoods, at-risk neighborhoods, and kind of some of the cultural adaptations that emerge at-risk areas. And so you have to be really careful to not just, like you said, we all love our animals like they're our kids. And you have to be very careful that you're not just, forcing that onto people who have maybe been raised to see dogs as security, as, providing security as guard dogs, or people who are just scared of dogs because they've never had a positive experience with a dog. We have seen, we've seen the gamut. Like currently, we have in our youth center programming, we have a young man whose dad bred and fought pit bulls. And he is there to learn how to be kinder to dogs. And we talked to him last week. I actually just had a conversation with the dog he's currently working with, who's a pit bull mix. And a really sweet and soft dog, just loves everybody. And, I kind of asked him like, well, how would you feel about somebody making Simba fight? And he said, well, that would just be so wrong. Like he wouldn't like it. And he's just such a good dog. I can't imagine anybody doing that to him. But it's, you have to kind of tiptoe around not just projecting your own expectations and having a conversation about, we start our programming by talking about things like empathy and compassion. And what I guess I've learned over the 10 plus years doing this, and with the help of some very well-trained social workers who are either volunteers or help me lead the program, that you have to start from a place of connection. You have to start with them just seeing the dog as a being that maybe is a little bit like them. And then very slowly you can talk more and more about how this animal maybe feels some of the same things, feels scared, feels pain, feels happiness. Once they start to see that and see that these dogs are emotional beings, then I think some of the ideas about people who don't treat their dogs well, they begin to understand that even if their uncle wants to do that, even if their cousin wants to do that, they start to understand that they're not okay with doing that. And, we hope that they carry that forward with them. So did I answer your question?
No, you totally did. It's, that was sort of what I was looking for, the last sentence that you have, right? You hope they carry it and pass it on to the future generations, right, at least to make it better one person at a time. So.
And we actually just last week, one of the young men said, we had been talking about animal cruelty and animal abuse and the problems of it. And I asked them to give me one thing they could do to, prevent future animal abuse or something they could do to address the problem. And one of the young men said, well, I would try to, foster or adopt a dog from a shelter because that would help get that dog out of the shelter. And one of the other guys laughed and kind of was like, well, that's just one dog. Like you're just, and myself and my facilitator, I couldn't come up with the exact words of that classic, saving the life of one dog won't change the world. And I got it all twisted up. But so when I came in today, I had printed off that saying. And I said to him, I was like, look, any of us in animal welfare know that you can't do it all. So you focus on what you can do. And I just wanted to really affirm to him that him wanting to help even one dog is huge.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
That's great.
So you have 3 different facilities or 3 different areas you're going to be opening up or being available to.
Yeah.
So is it just you that's doing all the interactions, and then you have helpers along with handlers and dogs?
Yeah, it's a small, it's like a small army that we have. No, it's not just me.
Right.
So I'm the lead, I guess. And I just say, like, I basically just tell people where to go and like point at places. But so like, for example, at the youth center, we have every dog has a handler. So with this session, we have 4 dogs coming. So we have 4 handlers. We have a professional dog trainer there because I'm not a dog trainer. So we have a professional dog trainer as well as a social worker. So we have somebody there to address the dog interactions and somebody to address the human interactions.
Mhm.
And that is kind of something we have improved upon in the 10 years that I've been volunteering or helping to kind of revise this program, is that we are addressing both the dog interactions as well as the human interactions, because there is some really rich and powerful stuff going on with the young men or with the young people, that it's really helpful to have a trained professional there to help them. Another example from tonight, 2 of our dogs, our program dogs, are going into foster to adopt. So they have been with these young men for the last 5 or 6 weeks. And the young men get really attached. They don't have a lot of their own at the youth center. So it doesn't take much for them to really develop a bond with these dogs. And so one of the dogs that's going into foster, I was able to bring him for like one last class so he could say goodbye to his young man. But the other dog was not able to come. And we could all see that the young man who had been handling Lumi was, pretty upset. And I think he wasn't quite sure how to express it, but he just said to me when I asked him how he was doing, he said, it's like she was kind of my dog. And, so it's helpful to have a social worker there who can kind of help him to talk about that a little more and process those feelings. But so we have, volunteers for that. And then the 2 staff, trainer and social worker. We usually have a couple other people just to help with setup and just to have some hands. So it's it's not a small thing. And it's kind of like, it's just a lot to juggle because you've got young people and shelter dogs. Yeah.
So in a situation like that, like, would those 2 men get another dog, or do you rotate who gets to be in the program, or,
Yeah, so that is, there are a lot of gray areas about what's best practices here. And when we started the programming and we were dealing with dogs from Chicago Animal Control, that population would be, that would rotate a lot more. And so we kind of went into it saying to the young men, hey, we're probably going to have different dogs every week. But then when I started working with some of the shelters out in Kane County and noticed that a lot of them had dogs that were there for months at a time, and talking to a colleague who runs a similar program called Teacher's Pet up in Detroit, I thought, I really think what we need to do is start pairing these young men up with a dog and having them kind of take ownership of that dog for the 10-week programming. And I think that works better. I think they're more invested. The downside is, for some of them, it's just difficult for them to see. Obviously, we all know it's a great thing when a dog goes into a foster or a foster to adopt home. But again, they're seeing just this one piece of it, which is, this is a dog I looked forward to working with every Sunday, and now I have to work with a new dog. So we bring a new dog in, and like today with the young man who had a new dog, we just were like, you can do all the same things that you were doing with Lumi. It's just, and now you can help another dog. So, yeah.
Good job. That was a perfect mute, man. Do you feel like, I mean, and as you've been doing this, when they get to week 3, 4, right, they're sort of like, okay, I can give this dog my all now, and then it makes the transition easier if they continue to I hate to say keep switching dogs, but you know what I mean, right? Get this one to a point of adoption and then take on another.
I think it's really, individual specific. I think maybe there are some young men who are just a little, or young people in general, but just maybe a little more confident. But I think the young men who have difficulty expressing themselves, it's hard for them to go from one dog to another. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, it doesn't happen that often. The fact that we had 2 leave this week is like, of course, we're all celebrating and really happy, but it doesn't happen that often. I think, as a lot of people know who are in animal welfare right now, the populations are pretty stagnant, and a lot of dogs are sitting for a long time. So, we're one of the dogs that we're working with this session, we actually had the last session. He's been in the shelter for probably going on 4 or 5 months now. So, yeah.
So how frequently do you run those sessions? And they're the 10 weeks.
Yeah. So I do once a week on Sundays at the Youth Center in St. Charles. We're starting the program in DeKalb, which will be once a week for 10 weeks at Tails. And that will just be this one 10-week session, because then the school year ends, and then we will hopefully start back up in the fall. And then we have a 6-week program going right now at the Illinois Youth Center in Chicago. I know of other programs that do twice a week, and I would love to be able to do that, but unless somebody can figure out how to clone me or my volunteers, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah,
so.
the shortage and rescue all around, right? Or
yeah,
the industry currently,
Hmm.
What?
So since you actually brought that up, I know that's sort of like an ending question we can touch on again later, but if someone is interested, working with you, or maybe, starting something in a different area, what's your advice for that?
Yeah. So, I have I guess privileged access to kind of how the sausage is made with these programs, because for the last 2 or 3 years, since I started the program in St. Charles, I've been really fortunate that my university, NIU, has been really supportive of this work and given me a couple of awards. And then I just got a grant, a $25,000 grant from Purina, to help evaluate the program and kind of figure out what's working. If any of you are scientists out there, I'll just say it's really, really, really hard to get good scientific data on an animal-assisted program, because the populations are always fluctuating. And so that has been a moving target, trying to get quality program evaluation data. But in the meantime, what we've been doing is just kind of tweaking the program here and there to see what does seem to work best, either from a qualitative perspective or just anecdotally. And so where Safe Humane is right now, which is the overarching nonprofit that helps run these programs, is we are really hoping to create a set of tools and a manual, and I have some materials that we're going to put together to be able to hand off to people to say, if you want to do a program like this, hey, we can come in and help get you started and set you up. And then we would love to see you, run with it. I've been, like I said, collaborating with a program called Teacher's Pet up in Detroit, or north of Detroit in Oakland, Michigan. And so between the two of us, two programs, and we serve a variety of populations, we've been able to build like a toolkit that I hope will be flexible enough that, if any organization working with at-risk youth or at-risk adults, veterans, kids in foster, kids living at a domestic violence shelter, incarcerated youth, that we could develop some kind of programming to help them out. So yeah, that is in the works, and that is our goal by the end of 2023, to have like a set of materials to make the program portable.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah. I heard you say you have a dog trainer on staff. So when you're selecting these shelter dogs, right, knowing that you've dealt with people and children that have dealt with trauma, are you, I'm guessing you're selecting a very specific type of dog, that will not be triggering or, not be too difficult of a training problem. So like, how do you guys select the dogs for the program?
Yeah. And that is, that's another, I think, I don't know what the right word is, just it's a complication or a dilemma, because I'm a dedicated shelter volunteer, and, whether it be at Chicago Animal Control, where a lot of the dogs deal with, a lot of anxiety and not getting out of their cages for days at a time. And I see Lauren Sanderson. So Lauren Sanderson, who popped up down there in the $1 million question, she is my trainer for the Lifetime Bonds program. And so she knows, so she and I talk about how the dogs that really need our help, the ones that really need it, unfortunately, are just not quite the right fit for this kind of programming. And it's, it kind of breaks our hearts a little bit. But I'm very fortunate that Lauren is not only a professional dog trainer, but she's from the sheltering world, and she's done Dogs Playing for Life, and she was a trainer at Tails Humane Society. So she is familiar with shelter dog behavior. And I would say because of that, we have worked with some dogs that are maybe a little less smooth around the edges. We've dealt the dog Lumi that just left for foster was pretty mouthy when she got overstimulated, and she would go for your shoelaces. She would go for your, sleeves. And the shelter gives us a lot of good information and training tips. And so we talked about that with the young men, where is this behavior coming from? What does it mean? Even today too, we had some teachable moments about another dog. We were doing some agility today, and we brought in jumps. And so one of the dogs was getting a little too excited with all the jumping, and he jumped up a couple times and got a sleeve, or, and I was so proud of the young man who was working with him, because he understood when Lauren told him, why we don't want him to get so overstimulated. And he said, yeah, I really want to help him, because I don't want him to go into a home and have him get, too excited and maybe bite somebody, but not because he was being aggressive. And so the young man just said, I want to help him be adoptable. So I want to help him get through that behavior. But depending on the shelter we're working with, we may, if I'm pulling dogs and we're using dogs from Animal Care League, I volunteer there. So I know the dogs quite well. Naperville is really good at giving us, some like behavioral insights. But we've worked with some shelters, and it's usually the municipal open access shelters, where it's a little more of an unknown. And, sometimes it it works and sometimes it doesn't. And we're very honest with the young men and the volunteers that, you know, we're going to roll with it and see what happens. And if we need to, you know, bring another dog in, because yeah, we don't want, we certainly don't want dogs who are going to be, you know, really mouthy, really jumpy. Yeah.
Sure.
So it's a delicate balance.
So do you pick do you just go and assess each of the dog, or they give you information about the dogs, you assess them to determine whether or not they're good for the program? Is it like, do you take a specific shelter? Do you pull from, multiple places?
Yeah. So it's really, it's kind of, it's a moving target because, for example, when we started this program in, actually we started it in Elgin working with juveniles on probation. And because we were in South Elgin, we were really, really close to Anderson Humane Society. And so we started working with Anderson Humane. And the trainer at the time that helped out with the training in the program, Steve Frost, I think a lot of people know Steve Frost. He was the trainer at Anderson at the time. So he pulled the dogs and brought them into the programming. And we tried to continue working with Anderson when we went to the youth center, but their dogs were getting adopted so quickly. I mean, which is a good thing, but they were getting adopted so quickly, we didn't have any consistency. So then I was volunteering at the time at Aurora Animal Control, and the dogs down there really needed help, and they really needed resources and training and enrichment. So we worked in agreement with the shelter director there, that even though they were closed on Sundays, which is the day that we do the programming, that she would bring staff in to be there so that we could bring the dogs from Aurora to the program. And that was another one where I was kind of doing, even though I'm not a dog trainer, I was kind of doing informal assessments based on my work as a volunteer there. That ended because just the transport of the dogs was just so it's like there's lots of things you have to think about.
Right.
We're fortunate now that we're working with Naperville that A, they're open on Sundays, and B, they have a van, and C, they have a volunteer who is willing to transport the dogs every Sunday. So that's like the holy grail of, you know, working with bringing those shelter dogs. But so it's kind of on a case-by-case basis, what shelter and what resources they have for us to get the behavioral information that we need. And sometimes it's a matter of Lauren meeting the dog before the programming just to get a sense of like, what are this dog's triggers if they have any,
Sure.
and figuring out if, you know, I think there have been a couple of dogs we worked with where she's like, I don't know if this is going to work, but so far, it has.
Good. So, well, it speaks to, you know, the criteria you guys are looking for, right?
Yeah.
It's specific. And like you said, you know, it's difficult, right? Because you want to try to help everybody get, sorry about that. That was my husband moving his chair again. It struck me. Anyway, to try to help everybody get some sort of help, right? So sometimes I find, and depending, everybody's different, but sometimes what I've seen, well, of my two places I've gone to for shelter and working and stuff like that, you know, sometimes you just see different things with the dogs and you want to give them help, but of course, this particular program's not it. So is there any kind of information sharing that you could do in terms of helping that shelter or that particular, you know, rescue organization to help those dogs that you see are in need? I mean, if you do like a walkthrough and stuff like that, do you guys ever do that stuff? I'm just curious because
I feel like I probably wouldn't have anything to tell them that they don't already know.
Or do. Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we talk about this with the young men too, about how important enrichment is. And, you know, that is something that the young men really relate to when, when you are working with shelter dogs, it really is a whole different ball game. And we give that. So we start the programming. We do 2 weeks with owned dogs, ambassador dogs that aren't perfect, like they may have, I bring my dog and she can be a little nervous when she first meets new people, and it gives us a chance to talk about that. We actually had one of the young men say when we were bringing ambassador dogs, he's like, I don't even know if I want to stay in this program. I mean, these dogs already know everything. And then the next week we bring in the shelter dogs and it's like, okay, the energy changes, the level of stress changes. But we talk about where that stress comes from, and that they get it because they're locked up and they don't get out when they want to. And so we talk about the importance of enrichment for managing stress, and we talk about how important just this couple of hours outside of the dog's cages are. But to your point about what shelters could do, I mean, I think we all know that most shelters are overcrowded and underfunded. And so this program is one little thing we can do to help get a couple dogs out once a week and publicize that shelter and their dogs. And publicize, even just today, we had some mental health counselors come observe class, and they said, wow, these dogs are from a shelter. Like, they're so nice and they're so well behaved. And it's like, yeah, I mean, most shelter dogs are, pretty great dogs. So dispelling the myth, and even the young men think that dogs end up in a shelter because, there's something wrong with them or they're bad dogs. So it's, we're just hopefully, like somebody said today, one of the volunteers said, we're just like planting that seed of all these little ideas that you hope, permeate out there. Yeah. But we are mainly looking for, I think, as Lauren, our trainer, said to me, the non-trainer, what we really are looking for is just sociability, just a dog that, is willing to work and engage with humans. Yeah.
I think that's what we're all looking for.
Yes.
Well, it makes training a whole lot easier, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. We've talked about that as far as assessing dogs, and I know Lisa does way more shelter work than I do. But right, that's, if you have behavioral problems and you're sociable, it's a lot easier to work with and fix than the dog that's like, you don't mean anything to me, and I have problems. So yeah. That's really nice. So, in just your 8-week program, 10-week program.
So there's one right now that's running at 6 weeks, but it's generally 10.
Okay. So in your 10-week program, when you see these dogs, and understanding they only get out once a week, with the time with these guys, of course it's helping, but how much of true rehabilitation for the dogs do you see?
That is a question I would really like to be able to quantify. And, we've toyed with, some ideas. Like, I know some of these programs will do saliva samples before and after to measure stress. Or, I guess you could do some kind of like behavioral assessments pre and post. We do a little version of the Canine Good Citizen test to evaluate some of those skills. But what we've settled on is generally we'll take like some video before the program and video after, at the end of the 10 weeks. And I would say what we generally see are dogs that are more engaged and with more impulse control when, meeting new people or being on leash. They're just, even if they still are a little jumpy, it's pretty easy to call them into a sit, and they're comfortable taking treats and comfortable with marker-based training, that kind of thing. So We are not going to undo, whatever more serious behavioral problems they have. But if we can address some of the behaviors that have maybe made it hard for them to get adopted, like maybe some minor mouthiness or jumping or pulling on leash, then I would consider that a win. I think this program, it's not a dog training program. It's really a human animal bond program.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And one more dog question, since I know we have a lot of dog folk watching, right? Do you get feedback from the shelters on like how many of the adoptions are permanent? And I'm guessing there, a lot of open source adoptions, so you're not vetting very well. I mean, not you, but the shelter, right? If you want a dog and you got the money, and
Yeah.
So do you keep track of how many might come back?
I don't. That's a good question. I mean, when we look at, outcomes, we do look at, the adoption. We look at length of stay. I suppose that totally there are some of our program dogs that have come back. I don't know percentage wise what that would be. I think part of, this is another, like, the scientist in me sometimes gets really frustrated that I can't measure some of these things better. But, part of what we're dealing with in these programs is our selection effects, that the dogs that we pick for the program are really already almost adoptable. So when they do finally get adopted, they were already almost there.
Okay.
I mean, I know, like, with our Naperville dogs, we are working with their longer term dogs. But these days, with the shelter population being what it is, I don't see long term as, obviously it's going to start to have an effect on the dogs, and they're going to start to, behaviorally be affected by being at the shelter for so long. But I don't think a dog being in a shelter a long time in this current age, there's nothing wrong with the dog. It's just nobody's adopting.
Agreed.
Yeah. So we look more at, like, average length of stay and how long are our program dogs staying versus what's the average for the whole shelter. But it's so confounded with, other variables that we can't control for. Yeah.
Do you have any stories of people or the kids that have sort of worked their way through, maybe just having the ability to connect has really pushed them forward in life, and come back to thank you for things later? Do you have any of those stories to share?
I don't have as many as Cynthia, the executive director from Safe Humane. She has probably hundreds. It's hard to track the young people once they leave the youth center, and there are protections in place that we actually can't reach out to them. They can reach out to us if they want to, continue. And so Cynthia's had some youth participants, particularly in Chicago, follow up, and we've had a couple former participants with the youth center come to Chicago Animal Control and intern there, and Safe Humane, through a generous sponsor, would pay for them to be like an intern and just work with some of the dogs at CACC. And we've had a couple young people who have done that for 6 months to a year. We've had some of our veterans that were in our Valor program, which is a similar program, but works with veterans with, like, PTSD and other emotional challenges. A couple of them went on, and I think one of them, or it might have been another participant in a different type of program, is working at Animal Welfare League now. So we see, and then we used to have a program in Chicago called Youth Leaders, where we would work with Chicago public school students and they would go into elementary schools and teach them about safe and humane pet ownership. And a lot of those young people have come back, and they're in college or they're working on their master's, and they've come back to say, how much this program helped them kind of find their voice and develop some confidence, and kind of help them narrow their focus of maybe what they wanted to do with theirs. Because I think another thing these programs can do is help young people just see that they have the ability to communicate with another being, even if it is a dog, or develop a training plan and see it through, or identify a problem and come up with solutions. So there's there are vocational skills that they're getting as well. So I've heard some young people come back and kind of report on that kind of thing. So yeah,
that's nice. That's great that you can have that information, right? Because it kind of helps you. Everybody needs a shot in the arm sometimes when you feel like you're really kind of fighting a battle.
Yeah. And I wish, I think this is it's a similar issue with the shelter, wanting to help the shelter dogs that most need it. It's a similar thing, I think, sometimes with the young people is, just unfortunately knowing the limits of what you're able to do with this time that you have. And for some of the young people in our programming, it may just be that they have an hour every week where they just sit with a dog that is calm and lets them pet them. And we may never hear what impact that has on them. And we may never hear from them after the program. But I think any of us who, love dogs know that could be, have a huge impact on their lives that we'll just never know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So again, the scientist in me is like, I want the data, but I can't always get the data. So
yeah, that's frustrating.
Do you find that from a social aspect with the kids, do you find that they do bond with each other over the dog training as well?
Yeah. And that's been really cool and really kind of surprising maybe. But so, for example, at the St. Charles program, it's all young men who are incarcerated there. And we just started our session before last. We actually had some of the young men come back, and we gave them a new title, and we called them mentors. We had these 3 young men who were just so good with the dogs and really loved the program. And they wanted to come back. They said, could we do another 10 weeks? And so we said, okay, well, we're going to call you mentors, and you're going to help the new participants kind of get on board. And so to see the pride in these young men that they're given this additional responsibility, and then to see them as they mentor, their friends at the youth center, and doing it in a very compassionate and diplomatic way, and not just saying no, you're doing it wrong, here, let me show you, but being young educators and young mentors. That's been really gratifying to see that, and to see the way they connect with each other, as well as the dogs. Because I'll be honest, sometimes dealing with teenage boys is a challenge, just to get them to,
anything.
I'm not a mom. So my maternal skills are fairly limited, but just to, see them come out of their shells and connect with each other. Yeah, it's pretty special.
Yeah, we're not moms either, but looking at the science of adolescence and what goes on in the brain in any species is the roughest part. I think that's why we see dogs in shelters mostly. Well, maybe not now, but in most of my lifetime, right between 6 months and 3 years old. Yeah, I mean, that's the roughest patch you're going to hit with most of them.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Yep. So, go ahead, Lisa.
Sorry. So then you'll take, you said 4 dogs. So I'm assuming it's, 1 person per dog. So then you're only able to take, do you take any more than that? Or is it just does it depend on who's available or the need?
Yes, so it really depends on who's available from a volunteer perspective, from a transport perspective, from a space perspective. So, we're fortunate that at the youth center, we work in this big gym. So we actually have a lot of room. But since COVID, the youth center population has been pretty small, which is a good thing. They sent a lot of young people home before COVID. So the population there is smaller than historically it's been. So we only have, so we have 4 to 5 young men, and then we bring 4 to 5 dogs. The program we're starting tomorrow, we will have 8 to 10 students. But there, I think we're going to keep to 4 to 5 dogs just because of space. And so there we will have, the students pair up, which, can sometimes be a challenge. And then you have to kind of manage the, talking over each other and confusing the dog, so there are a lot of little, there's a lot of intricacies that we have to work out as the space and the population changes. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So do you have any way to get donations, like to be able to potentially pay a volunteer to drive them, or do you get well, I guess that's 2 questions. So do you have a way to collect donations for things like, supplies or paying volunteers to drive dogs around? Or
Yeah, so we, with some of the money that I have from my grant, that's afforded us to be able to consistently pay our trainer and a social worker. So we're paying for that staffing. Paying for volunteers to transport, it's something that we've talked about. So far, knock on wood, we haven't had to do it because currently the shelter that I'm working with is donating that time, and we try to find ways to give back. So whether it's like this past Christmas, we did like a Kong stuffing drive, and we brought them a bunch of stuffed Kongs. So it's kind of like quid pro quo, but Safe Humane is a nonprofit, and so we always need donations of dog treats and harnesses and volunteers, and money to drive dogs would be great. Having volunteers transport is, there's challenges there too. Even just transport in general stresses the dogs out, so there's just all these things that you really have to balance out. And do the best you can with what you have. But, if people are interested in the programming or donating, like safehumanechicago.org is a good place to go. And there's a link there to donate. But I think so far I'm really fortunate that what we started at the youth center in St. Charles, we have just a really solid group of volunteers who are really committed and go above and beyond every week with whether they need to transport last minute, whether that, just anything that I throw them, they're usually willing. And I mean, the reason why I'm here talking to you is because one of my volunteers, Karen Schneider, told you guys about this. So that just speaks to how we've got this great little community that we've built. So
I believe Karen is watching tonight. So so just one other kind of question. When you have the young men with you, right, because it is a facility, is there like paid staff from the facility that have to transport them and stay there for safety, or is there any risk to that, or is the facility pretty on board with what you're doing? And
the facility has been so we started in Chicago, and we still have a great relationship there, and they've just always been so supportive. And I think COVID changed some things a little bit in terms of population, but generally we didn't have security in our program, because the more staff or security you have, it's going to change the dynamic of the participants. So for a long time, we didn't have any security or staff in the room with us. I mean, they were available, but never had any issues ever. And in St. Charles, we have one staff member. He's not security. He's just a staff person who leads the young men there from their cottages. But, again, knock on wood, the young people we work with just couldn't be more respectful and appropriate. They may horseplay around with themselves a little bit, but when it comes to working with the dogs, they're tuned in and they listen. And, our handling is very, so Janice Tripto is the head of behavior and training for Safe Humane, and she's just an incredibly observant and careful trainer. And so she's kind of trained me in this programming and how to handle these dogs successfully. And so we're just very careful about 6 feet apart and, not have resources around that might create issues. So we've just never had any issues with the dogs or the young men. We've been really fortunate that way. And I think it just speaks to kind of just the magic that happens when you put it there, and we all know why we're there, and we're just kind of all on our best behavior.
That's great. I mean, it sounds like a really nice program.
Yeah.
Now, are there around the country? I mean, I imagine there's different types of programs such as this. Are you familiar or in contact with any of the other, other organizations that would be doing something like this?
Yeah, so I am familiar with at least half a dozen that specifically work with young people and shelter dogs. The shelter dog, there are a lot of animal assisted interventions, but working with the shelter dog population is fairly novel. So Teacher's Pet, as I mentioned, I give a shout out to them because I've learned a lot from them. They've been doing this for a long time. And Amy Johnson, who started it, is a teacher and a dog trainer and now a licensed counselor. So she kind of wears all the hats, and the program benefits because of all of that knowledge that she has. So I've learned a lot from her. There's a couple programs out in California that I know of, and a couple programs over in the UK that they seem to kind of be on this, like, working with prison populations and shelter animals. And it seems like the shelter system over there maybe has a little more funding and they're a little more progressive. But there's still I think a lot more work to be done. But these, these programs they're challenging because you're dealing with two very nuanced and bureaucratic systems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
True. Good.
So I know you say a lot of them leave, right, with the vocational skills or dog training skills, things like that. I'm guessing it looks well on their time spent resume, right? Of doing things like this and communicating and do the social workers there do anything once they leave the program to kind of help push them back into society or help place them with jobs or other things like that? Like I know you mentioned CACC and things like that, but
I don't know. That's a good question, and it's something that I should probably follow up with them. I do know from what the young men say that their social workers and the counseling staff there are very helpful in kind of setting them up for success as they get ready to go home. It might be, I mean, that's a really good point you make. It might be a really good idea to kind of follow up about, we have had a couple of young men that we felt really would excel if they wanted to go into like dog training or, even get a job at a pet store or just get started in the business that way. And so we've kind of recommended that to them, to either the young person or to their mental health or their counselor. But again, like, we're not able to follow up with them once they leave. So I've given a couple of these young men my card, but But, I mean, I'm sure once you get out into the real world, it's, there's a lot of other things to be doing than, calling the woman that ran a program for you while you were incarcerated. So,
Right.
Yeah.
And
I think that's a good point that to kind of match up because we are trying to provide, some of these vocational skills or these social emotional learning skills. And we kind of impress upon the young men that what they're learning here working with the dogs, it's not just about the dogs, but it's about learning patience and resilience and impulse control and all those things that will help them once they get out.
And I know we mentioned teenage dogs. I think you said it in the very beginning, but I have forgotten. What is the age range that you work mostly with in these programs?
It's mostly 14 to 20. I would say average is more like 16, 17. The youth centers, the young people have to either they leave by the time they're 20 or they go into adult prison. So so the age range there is to 20. Over the summer, we've worked a couple programs with high school kids. So yeah, so they're all kind of in the, high school age. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. That's fascinating. I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I've heard of different programs like that, but I didn't realize there was one for, younger people that are in need that way. So that's really neat.
Yeah. And I mean, there's lots of different models of, so there's a youth center in Warrenville that used to have a program affiliated with Naperville Area Humane Society called Project Positive Future. And there they would actually let the shelter dogs stay on campus at IYC Warrenville.
Wow.
And the young people, they would have a cottage set up to have one dog living there. And the dog would live there for 4 weeks and they would train them CGC skills. And then the dog would return to the shelter and hopefully get adopted. But I guess the new superintendent there doesn't like dogs. And so he decided he didn't want to do that anymore, which is a real shame. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. When it becomes, it's not necessarily about the dogs, right? It's about helping the people, but yeah. So if someone was interested, in learning more or starting something of their own, who could they reach out to with your group to kind of, bounce some things off of or get more information? Like I know you mentioned you had a mentor in Detroit, and like who would they reach out to?
Yeah, so they could either reach out to me, and I don't know if there's a place I can type like my email or.
You can put it in the comments right here. Yep, and then.
Oh, can I leave a comment? Okay.
Yep, you can, and then it'll come up on all of our pages and.
Okay. This is now. I feel like I can't. I don't.
Okay, here. How about you read it to me and I'll put it out here.
I'll do that. Yes. So it's K Burchfield. So it's just my first initial last name at niu.edu. And that's probably the best place to start. Or if they just want to look around a little bit at what we do, like I said, Safe Humane, it's safehumanechicago.org. And they have a website, and you can kind of see what the Lifetime Bonds programming looks like. And there is a place to connect, a link that you can email that will go to Cynthia Bathurst, the executive director. So if you're in and around Chicago, that might be the place to go. If you're out more west or just interested in, the programming in general, then it might be better to email me. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've put both of those in the comments section if anyone out there is interested, even in volunteering, right? I think there's no shortage of, there's not shortage. There's always a shortage of volunteers.
Yes.
Exactly.
There's no shortage of need.
Yes.
So, yes.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, and we run the youth center programming pretty much year round. So we do 10 weeks and then we maybe take a couple weeks off and then we start again. So yeah, there's always something going on.
Great. That's awesome.
And I think too, right? Anyone who's a For Your Canine person, if you know Karen Schneider, right? She does the volunteering there. for that. Yeah, so you could reach out to her as well and learn a little bit more of the in-depth of what she does out there. So sorry, Karen, I'm throwing you there if you
yeah, and she was there just tonight. So she was teaching them about nose work and introducing them to what that's like. So it's been great to have her expertise as well. So yeah.
Nice.
And and I'll just shameless kind of plug here too, that moving forward into 2023 and beyond, I actually may be looking for a trainer for the youth center program. Lauren, wonderful dedicated trainer, will be helping with the Tails program. And again, you can only be in so many places at once. So any of you dog trainers out there, if you may be interested, let me know.
Lisa, didn't you just have a shelter space open up or something?
Right.
All right. Well, thank you, Keri, so much for your time and telling us all about this program. It just sounds wonderful, and you're only doing good for dogs and people. So
yeah. Kudos.
Thank you
Good job.
so much.
Thank you.
So much. All right.
thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.